We're now going to have a presentation, FuelEU Maritime from Challenge to Opportunity. Our presenter, Ralf Garrn, who's the Managing Director with OceanScore. Ralf, please.
Thank you.
Do I not have a screen here?
Say again?
I don't have a screen here?
There's a screen there. If that works for you. Or you can just turn it over.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I have to improve. I have only a screen there, so bear with me if I look over there once in a while. FuelEU Maritime, a new regulation. ETS started this year. FuelEU Maritime started last year. And I think, or I hope I can also answer some questions that were addressed to the panels. Before I do that, a little bit more about scope. So we are all about compliance in shipping. The company was founded in 2020, but really started last year when we decided to grow the company. We did our seed financing last year, and our Series A we concluded 2 months ago successfully, just within 3 months. Our solutions are mainly around helping shipping companies manage the EU ETS, but now also FuelEU. But we also provide data to insurance companies and banks. We have calculated for all 33,000 vessels the Poseidon Principle alignments that insurance companies and bank uses. And that's information that they get from us. Our backers are companies like MSC, Döhle, who are investors in OceanScore, Portline, but also venture companies like Motion Ventures or the Dock, etc. FuelEU Maritime has a timeline. It started actually with submitting the monitoring plan this August. In 2025, so starting from January 2025, shipping companies have to start monitoring their fuels. And it is going to be similar as you will see, or as you already see in EU ETS, for every, maybe not for every voyage, but for every time charter, they will report the fuels used on the vessels and basically calculate compliance balances, surpluses, or negative balances, and then report to the charterers and expect them to pay for it. In 2026, so until the end of March 2026, the information needs to be submitted to the EU and to the verifiers. They verify on a vessel basis whether vessels have a surplus or a negative balance. Then they have 1 month to decide whether they want to pool vessels, so offset negative balances of certain vessels with positive balances of other vessels. And once that is done, the pool gets certified, and the vessels who still have a negative balance will have to pay a penalty. And once the penalty is paid, you will get a FuelEU certificate of compliance, and then you're done. There are some parallels and some differences between FuelEU and ETS. So FuelEU is all about using low greenhouse gas fuels. So it's really moving the industry towards climate neutral fuels. And the parallels are that the same vessels are affected, roughly 12,500 currently in the EU, that the same regional logic is implemented with very few exceptions on outermost regions. The data streams are the same, so there will be noon report information submitted to the class society. They will verify the voyage emissions and voyage fuels, and that is basically then being used to calculate the penalties. The DOC holder is responsible, which is very important because only the DOC holder can generate surpluses or penalties, or negative balances actually, and pay penalties. And there's a phase-in concept. It starts with a 2% reduction in 2025 from the baseline, but these reductions really increase over the years, a lot more than you see on ETS, and also a lot more than you see at the trajectories of Poseidon Principle or CII rating that IMO uses. The difference is that it's a penalty system. So you don't pay carbon taxes like EUAs, you pay a penalty for too much greenhouse gas emission. It's also no polluter pay principle. You cannot, by law, charge the penalties to the charterer. It has a different matrix. We heard that, I think, in the second panel this morning. It's not about the emission of the vessel once the fuel has been bunkered. You have to consider all the emission of the extraction of the fuels, the transport of the fuel. So it's well to wake. And it's calculated in energy. So it's CO2 per energy, and it has different discount mechanisms. And you have the opportunity to bank, which means save surpluses, or borrow from the future, like you borrow from a bank, but then you have to pay interest on it, and you can pool. So there are some parallels and some differences. The main difference is this regulation is about bunker emissions and energy, while ETS looks at carbon emission and the currency is EUA, so a carbon tax. Here we look at the well-to-wake emission per energy. So it's CO2 equivalent per energy. And well-to-wake means that you have to consider all the emissions from exploration, processing, so refineries, transport, etc. And you also have to include other factors like, and that's why it's equivalent, like methane, and N2O, etc. And it's the total energy used. There's a reference value, and it's the 91.16 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. That's the reference value from 2020. The first reduction is only 2%, so the new target in 2025, starting in January 2025, is 89.3 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. And this is an important number because we will have to figure out what is the grams per CO2 per megajoule of different fuels. And the deviation is then used to basically calculate penalties or surpluses. And the penalty system, so we are now talking about CO2 equivalent per megajoule, but that's not how the penalty is charged. The penalty is charged by converting the CO2 per megajoule into very low sulfur fuel equivalents. So another calculation. And then you pay basically for every ton of VLSFO equivalent, if you have a negative balance, 2,400 euros per ton. Calculated, if you calculate this, you use this, and the EU calls it the basic formula. It is split into two components, the well-to-tank component, where you calculate the CO2 of all amounts of fuels, which is the CO2 times M, and then you adjust it for the lower calorific value, which is the LCV. It's just the heating value of the fuel. And then you add the energy that you buy from electric. So if you have onshore power, you have electric, but since the electric onshore power energy is always considered zero emission, it is added 0. And then you add the tank to wake, so that's what we already know from EU ETS. Pretty much the same formula. It just considers methane slip and other components to it, but this is really how you calculate it. You really don't have to do it yourself. We, or also class societies, do it for our clients. And then you apply discounts. Wind propulsion gets a discount. Ice class, especially when sailing in ice, gets a discount. OPS, onshore power, gets a discount. And RFNBO, so you get a reward factor for renewable fuels of non-biologic origin. We have heard a lot about securing biofuels. Before we get to the biofuels, this chart shows basically how conventional fuels will be behaving in FuelEU. VLSFO is the benchmark, 91.7, but if you use that, you will pay a penalty because the new benchmark is the 89.3 on the bottom left corner in 25. So that's the benchmark. VLSFO is above the benchmark, you pay a penalty. MGO, same. LGO, auto, penalty. Fossil methanol, even more. Fossil ammonia, way more. And fossil H2, even more than that. So none of these fuels will help you in FuelEU. They will create huge penalties. Then you have and we talked about this a lot, LNG and LPG. LNG and LPG actually help you. And when you look at LNG auto, 82.9, LNG diesel, 76.1, and LPG Athens, 72. So that actually gets you almost towards 2040, which was a question in the last panel. And what you see on the bottom, which is really interesting, that the reduction in 25 is 2%. In 30, it's 6%. And then in 35, it's 14.5%, which means the greenhouse gas intensity requirement really drops down and gets really, really tough to meet the requirements. For biofuels, there's a different picture. Now, we have circled most of the biofuels in red because they are feedstock-based. Feedstock-based biofuels do not help you with FuelEU. Only waste-based biofuels. So if you have olives or rape oil and you press it into frying oil, you cannot use the first press of oil in your vessels. You can use the rest. So if you press it the second time, the waste, then it's considered waste. But the first pressing is not. So all the conventional, or all the new biofuels, palm oil, methane, palm oil, open effluent, so before methane capture, palm oil with methane capture, rapeseed oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, it's not going to help you. It only helps you once it has been used for frying purpose. And this is a really interesting thought, and we learn here every day as well. What happens to all the frying oil now? On average, frying oil is used 7 days. And after 7 days, new frying oil is used to fry French fries or chicken. And will the frying companies now only fry for 3 days and sell the oil as waste oil to shipping? This is a feasible thing because they might make more money on selling waste frying oil than they make on selling chicken or French fries. Because when you look at biodiesel, animal fat, and especially waste cooking oil, which is the frying oil, it has a value of 16.38%, and that's the only waste at this time, waste oil, that gets you to 2050. Or almost. See, in 2050, the requirement is 18.2 CO2 equivalent per megajoule, and only waste cooking oil meets that target. Okay, I'm almost done. So the thing is, you calculate all that, and then you generate a compliant surplus or a deficit. If you create a surplus, you have the option of banking it and use it in the future. Or you pool with other vessels and sell to vessels that have a deficit. If you have a deficit, you pay the penalty at 2,400, or you join a pool if you can buy a surplus for less than 2,400. Or you borrow from the future if you know already you have new vessels ordered that have a better balance. The EU ETS is a pay-as-you-go. The FuelEU is a surplus or deficit system, and it's all about choices, commercial choices you make for the future. So on ETS, you just pay EUAs, and here on FuelEU, it's about improving your compliance balance by bunkering with the bunker, with using shore power, different propulsions like wind, where you get an incentive, etc., etc. But the most important thing is aligning across stakeholders, because the owner, the charterer, and the DOC holder will have to negotiate on strategies for the future. The charterer buys the bunker, the DOC holder has to pay the penalty and create the pools, and so you basically have to sit down and figure out how each party is incentivized. And then the owner has the increased maintenance cost of the engine, so they will also want to have something of it. The average cost on ETS is 220. The penalty in the beginning of FuelEU is 62 per ton bunker, but if you do it right, you generate a profit of 300 per bunker. Now, there are a few decisions to be made. What bunker to use? Would you use shore power because it's zero emission? But you need then connection on your vessel and also in the port. Will you use wind assistant propulsion because it really helps you? Managing, will you pay the penalty? Or do you want to borrow at a 10% interest? Do you want to pool with other vessels? Or do you want to bank? And banking is a really good option because we saw that the decrease in 2030 is 6%. We expect a surplus market next year, because it's only 2% reduction. In 2030, we will have a huge deficit market. And if you have banked your surpluses, you might be able to sell them at a really high price. Now, just a quick example, and you will have this presentation afterwards. So normal container vessel, 12,000 tons HFO, 1,000 tons MGO. It's not compliant. It will have a negative balance of 328 tons of VLSFO. The total penalty will be roughly 800,000 euros. If you now replace HFO with B25, 25% of waste bioblend, you will have a 10% lower Carol heating value. And then if you buy it for 1,200 a ton, then you will have a new greenhouse gas intensity of 75.5, a compliant surplus of almost 2,000 tons of VLSFO equivalent, which, if you can sell it in the pool for 2,000 euros, you will make a nice profit of 4 million instead of paying a penalty of 800,000, or you can internally set off 86,000 tons of LFO. Now, when you compare this buying waste oil versus HFO, you have more than just one effect. The one effect is you have higher bunker cost, of course, but it's like in this example, 187 more bunker cost. But you have a lower FuelEU penalty because you have a surplus, so negative 395, and you also save on ETS. You will have less carbon cost, and the net is 263 for replacing HFO by B25, and for this example vessels, it's 3.2 million more at the end of the year. Almost the last slide. What you need to do is basically simulate your business together with the other stakeholders. Assess what is the baseline, so it's basically how the ship behaved in the past. then calculate or gain transparency on what your greenhouse gas intensity is, what your compliance balance is, and what your costs are. It's not the fuel cost alone, it's also your ETS cost, and it's your bunker cost. Then you need to decide on how to improve. So it's simulate different bunkers, different onshore power scenarios, different propulsions, compare the greenhouse gas intensity on the different scenarios, and analyze vessel per vessel or fleet or subfleet per subfleet the outcome, and then manage it. So when you know what your balance negative plus your total cost is, then you need to basically choose your options. Either you pay the penalty, you pool, you bank, or you borrow. You create pools with different, like you can only put one vessel in one pool, but you can create different pools with different vessels, and then you assess your impact on the entire company. And I think this is the last slide. It's so easily to build a complete fleet EU exposure assessment. It's like you should do that. We provide a planner for that to calculate all the scenarios for all parties involved. Then you get the full cost picture. You will have the reports to discuss with all stakeholders of various scenarios. And then we have a team in place now that supports you with workshops. So it's not that we really want to sell a tool. We sell our knowledge, and the tool is part of it. Yeah, and this is basically my presentation on FuelEU. Normally this is way more than an hour, so this was just an overview, but I hope you got some knowledge on what is coming in the next couple of months. Thank you very much.